Hello. Brian, are you there?
Hi Thornton, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. That was the dulcet tones of Michael Morrell, Indigenous.
Oh, right.
Introducing our live broadcast, which hopefully somebody's listening to. This is Reclamation Time, brought to you by Salvo, and this week, or this month I should say, Brian Murphy of GBE. How do I introduce you, Brian? What's the best way to call you?
Well, Green Building Encyclopedia is what I have been doing for a long time now, and Green Building Calculator is what I'm focusing on at the moment.
Right, okay. So, and that we will be putting links up at some point on Twitter and LinkedIn to help people see the bits of news topics that are linked to web pages, and also linked to Brian's copious website. His website is the fullest website you've ever come across. If you want to know anything at all about, well, I don't know, is it green building specification? Would you say that?
Well, historically that was the ambition, but the specification is not the strong point. It's just trying to educate people on the right choice of materials, right properties for the right reasons, in the right places. So it's much broader.
You could change the same acronym, GBE, could be, instead of Green Building Encyclopedia, Green Building Education.
Yeah, well, I did set up a separate site called Green Building Learning, and that was just around the time that COVID came along, and my co-director on that project got COVID long term, and so we mothballed it just at the wrong moment. So, and that really was, we were running workshops and seminars, webinars, visits. We were going to do a visit to the British Library, and of course they had to shut down too. But yeah, so close. But Green Building Learning was the other one.
Okay, so we've got a sort of program that I've drafted up and sent to Brian, and which he kindly agreed to look at and discuss today. But true to form, I've just bombed him with a late breaking bit of news. We just last month we talked about the M&S demolition in Oxford Street, or rather the lack of it, the fact that the minister has stepped in and has prevented it at the last minute, and how that's put a cat among the pigeons in the mainstream construction, because they're not confident now about anything to do with demolition, and also the demolition industry. Anyway, as a result of that news snippet last month, it mentioned a thing called the National Planning Policy Framework, which I hadn't come across. Should have done, of course, but haven't. So we were. I looked it up, and there didn't seem to be anything about reclamation and reuse in the 76-page document, which the Minister for Communities, Levelling Up Communities and something else in the UK government has issued. And so I wrote to the Minister and said, what are you doing to support the reclamation trade and encouraging reuse of reclaimed building material? And he kindly wrote back to us. Rather, the minister didn't, but Jonathan, it was signed rather enigmatically, Jonathan, Correspondence Unit. So it was handed over to somebody who perhaps was a minion rather than somebody high up. And what the reply was, and our specific question to him was, let me just dig that out. It was what we said. In 2015, the government published a document outlining its circular economy ambitions, which stated there is a case for government intervention to facilitate the transition towards a more circular economy where the market alone does not produce the optimal situation. This includes encouraging collaborative and partnership working and promoting technological innovation and infrastructure that is needed to underpin and push the boundaries to deliver real change. Now, okay, so we wrote to him and said, Salvo and the many thousands of people working in the building reclamation sector has been undervalued and could achieve more with proper support from the UK government. Lack of government support for reuse over recycling, which has since 2011 been a legal obligation. This is in the Waste Framework Directive, UK Waste regulations, and little understanding of the role that stockholding reclamation dealers play, especially within city centres, has, we believe, resulted in a reduction in reclaimed building materials being saved and reused. So, his reply starts off, thank you for your email to me, to the department, dated the 13th of November last month, regarding government support for the reclamation sector and reclaimed building materials. This came in on the 11th of December, which is only a couple of days, no, yesterday in fact. I hope it will be helpful to set out the government's policy in this area. And the letter then goes on with several paragraphs about the National Planning Policy Framework, which is this 76-page document, which contains nothing, as far as I can see, about reusing anything other than old buildings, which is fine. But if demolition takes place, nothing about reusing reclaimed building material. And also, it also mentions the National Design Guide and, excuse me, the National Model Design Code, providing tools and guidance and giving local authorities some kind of lead on what they are supposed to be doing. Right, I'm just recovering from a cold, so this is not the best position to be in. Brian.
Yeah. I'm looking at the same letter, and I have to admit that I am familiar with the National Planning Policy Framework, but I had never heard of the National Design Guide and the National Model Design Code. So I'm thinking, okay, well, we've got to go and investigate those two. But the National Planning Policy Framework, in his paragraph, he says that it specifies that a planning system should encourage the reuse of existing resources, including the conversion of existing buildings. So if that's true, that's good. But if it isn't true, we probably ought to go back to them and kind of point out the absence of the ambition to reuse materials as well as reusing buildings. And then the National Design Guide and the National Model Code. I can remember when Greta asked the adults to come and join her in 2019 in London. And we all, thousands of people turned up, many from the professions. And at that point, the government and the local authorities were all signing up to the Declare campaigns that were going on. So the architects had done it, the engineers, the education were doing it, and more people have joined in. But the local authorities, by signing up, were putting themselves under an obligation to do something different or do something better. And at the time I was thinking, well, none of them know what to do. None of them have got any idea about a kind of resourceful and low-carbon approach to everything. And all they've got is things like BRE Green Guide to Specification and BREEAM and things of that nature, none of which are really helping us to get where we need to go. And so these national design guides, if they've come recently or if they get updated from time to time, they might start to address the whole life carbon and embodied carbon and other issues. But in his two paragraphs, he's implying that they are addressing all of those things very robustly. So, and then the question has to be asked, are the local authorities aware of these things? I'm sure they must be under an obligation to. But you don't hear about them, and you don't see them or hear them mentioned in planning applications and planning objections and things of that nature. But there may be some tools there for us to work with, but we've got to get to know them since we didn't know of them before.
Okay.
Over to you.
Yeah. So the National Design Guide is if you look at it, is just a load of sketches with no writing on it at all, and no suggestion that things are going to be reused, reclaimed and reused at all. The National Model Design Code is a leaflet, a booklet, but again, it's not. And it actually has photographs of things which look as though they could be reclaimed, but it doesn't actually mention reclaiming and reusing at all. So, if the default position is for local authorities that if they haven't got their own code, that the national code has to be used, or is the defence for planning decisions. To me, I don't know if you remember PPG 15, Planning Policy Guidance 15, way back in the 1990s and 2000s. This was an interpretation by civil servants of the Planning Act, the 1990 Planning Act, and they wrote a load of guff in there, which local authority planning officers then believed was the law, and a lot of decisions were made based on that wrongly. Because actually, the PPG 15, the planning guidance, didn't follow the Planning Act. The law was different from the guidance. The guidance gave more powers to the officers and local authorities than the law did, and so people ended up going to law. People with deep pockets against councils based on the fact that the planning guidance was incorrect, even though the officers, of course, swore black as white that the planning guidance was the law. And it seems to me that this might be a similar sort of thing. I don't know what the law is that, where is the democracy? Where has there been a national debate? Presumably there was a national debate, but what is the act which says you must abide by everything that's written in the National Planning Policy Framework on all the buildings that you build?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not an expert in planning by any means. My only experience of national planning stuff and local planning stuff is through challenging developments in my patch and trying to get them to be better rather than trying to stop them. So I'm stuck for offering any thoughts on this. But you're right. I mean, it needs to be formally set out, and
I'm going to write.
And then everyone,
I'm going to write again.
Yes.
And say that the letter was very interesting, but it didn't actually confirm that the government was in any way backing the circular economy's reclamation and reuse, like the 500 businesses in the UK that actually do reclaim and sell material for reuse. The government doesn't seem to be backing that, and there's nothing in the letter that they replied to other than these design codes, which don't seem to say anything. And I will ask them, what is the legal basis for suggesting that the local authorities have to abide by these design guides if they haven't got their own?
I mean, there is a whole process, and I'm told that it's a kind of 2-year cycle where the local authority can develop its own local policy framework, and the public are at liberty to join in the discussion to help steer that, to help it make it more locally specific. But it's a 2-year cycle, and I'm not aware of anyone so far, and I made a point at the time, this was all about 2 years ago, I want to get involved in the local planning policy framework discussions. And I effectively said, put my name on a list. I want to be informed, but I've never been informed, and I've never known where to start looking other than to go and knock on the local authority. But, when you're busy, you just never get a chance to do that. But the theory is everyone gets involved and everyone has a voice and can try to encourage the appropriate things to do. And today it would be focus very heavily on low-carbon construction, low embodied energy materials, bio-based materials, and reclaimed and historic materials. So those things need to be written in. But if the general public and the general planning departments, who are used to business as usual, don't get to hear any of those arguments, then it just carries on with business as usual. So
seems to me,
and it strikes me you've got to go to every local authority and have a discussion or submit a paper that goes into a lot of detail.
Our message to the trade then is going to be get hold of your local planners and make sure they understand that you exist and that they start building you into their planning guidelines. And if they don't do that, if we've got an example where a salvage business actually goes to their council and say, look, we exist, it's your duty to tell people that we're here because we're part of the we're helping the government to achieve its circular economy ambitions, which United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and all the rest of it, reducing carbon footprint, and so there has to be it's going to be for the government then to say, well, it's solely a local authority matter. They can choose to either reuse stuff or not. In which case, the government's strategy for its carbon emissions are called into question, or it seems to me that's the deal. And but we'll write and try and also clarify what law this is. What is the legal underpinning to these guidelines that they've produced.
Yeah,
we have been approached by a guy that we know he's actually seems to be involved in something similar to this, and he's asked us to join in with a thing in North Wales, which is to do with this particular issue. So he might know a lot more about it than I do. In which case, his name's Adrian Dobinson. And I've known him for a long time, and he might be prepared to have a chat on our podcast, which would be nice.
Yes, absolutely. Now, it strikes me that there was an activity that was going on with an emphasis on carbon a while ago, and I think it was one of the kind of key players at the AECB, the Association of Environment Conscious Building, who wrote some guidance as a kind of model template, which could be used by anybody, ideally by AECB members, to go and lobby their local authority to try to get them to change their national planning policy, their local planning policy framework, with an emphasis on carbon. Now, it might be that he could be approached again and look at these templates that he produced and see if there are some additional words that need to be added to it, and then use that via your network of salvage companies, plus interested local architects or developers or whoever it might be that has some influence, and make sure that information is in front of them, and make sure that they're reminded every time they look at their 2-year cycle. So that I can definitely try and follow that up. I can't recall his name at the moment, but I'm pretty sure I know who it is.
Okay, that would be brilliant.
And it may be, and I believe what he did was that he gave some suggestions about policies, 10 policies, and gave case studies, example buildings of where it has been done successfully. so that they had some robust information, not just this is a good idea, but look, this is a good idea and this is how easy it is to do it, evidence that it's been done before. And so that's a way. And circular economy is like, 5-10 years ago, everyone was writing down sustainability in their reports.
Yes.
Well, now everyone's writing circular economy. But are they doing very much, as they weren't doing very much in the past? Because everyone spent their time writing reports on why they shouldn't do things. Well,
no, that's right. There's an awful lot of froth, and the people. It seems to me the people who are doing things still are very sort of niche builders who use reclaimed materials. The retail sector who are good on reclamation and reuse, and an awful lot of private people. And the odd client within mainstream construction who says, you have to reuse this stuff. But they are few and far between, because they don't want to get embroiled in a great kind of delaying argument with all their professionals who, most of them say, don't touch reclaim stuff with a barge pole, because it comes with no guarantees and no warranties and blah, blah, blah. And in fact, although we've debunked a lot of those arguments, they still. That's where the circular economy is. It's circulating the negative arguments about not reusing stuff.
Yes, sadly.
But anyway,
and sadly, you have debunked these things in the past, but that information needs to be, people need to be reminded continuously to try and get them over the hump and get them engaging. But when you see so many seminars being presented on circular economy and particularly Dutch projects where there's an awful lot of stuff going on, lots of reclaim, lots of reuse, and you hear about architects in the UK who are also well and truly engaged with the circular economy and doing it, there just aren't enough projects going on, and there just needs to be, Salvo is the gateway to that sector, but I'm not sure how many people know about Salvo.
No.
And maybe LinkedIn is a way of kind of, every time somebody says circular economy in an article, re-ping it or reply with some URLs to Salvo and Green Building Encyclopedia and various other things, just so that people have got some route to...
Brian, we can do that, but the problem is the circular economy is taken over from recycling. Yes. 10 years ago, everything was recycling, which is destroying perfectly good reusable materials and crushing them and melting them down, whatever. But it's not reuse, and we're still looking at 90% plus of material is being recycled and not reused. Well, the circular economy, because of Alan MacArthur and one or two others who are connected with plastics, which are eminently recyclable, not terribly reusable. It's driven by this concept of recycling. So, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 12, I think it it says quite clearly, advises all the countries in the world to encourage reuse and recycling. Well, if you put those two into a single phrase, then everybody's going to recycle, because it's a hell of a lot easier than trying to reuse something. And crushing and destroying it loses all the embodied energy and the resource value, and as you know, we aren't getting very far as a result of this. And the year before last, we wanted to go to Glasgow and the COP thing and make a presentation about it, to ask the United Nations to change SDG 12, I think it's 12, which has this phrase in it, reuse and recycle, or recycle or something. And of course, everybody is recycling, nobody's reusing. 2%, probably 2% less, maybe 1% in the UK of the construction material market is reuse. And of course, one RSJ, or a few RSJs that get reused in a model building somewhere in central London at huge expense, huge embodied energy too, because they all had to get transported to Teesside and back. They get they're lauded as being the exemplar that we all should follow. Whereas all these guys who've been 500 businesses around the UK and Ireland who've been assiduously reclaiming material and stockholding it for people to reuse, don't get any kind of recognition at all. Anyway, look, I'm going to move on. We're moving on. We've got 15 items and we've got 35 minutes to do it in. So I'm just going to go very quickly through some of these things while my voice holds out. Persistent organic pollutants, perfluoroalkyls and polyfluoroalkyls, otherwise known as PFAs, novel entities, forever chemicals. The chemicals now, which is every one of us in the planet has these chemicals inside our tissues, and they're endocrine disruptors, they affect fertility and so on. And so this is now becoming a more serious thing, and it's particularly I picked up this thing from the US Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, which is now telling companies that they're not allowed to produce PFAs. This PFA is the sort of
collective.
Yeah, the acronym for it. There's something like 10,000 chemicals. It might be considerably more. Nobody really knows. Everything's got it in. And in our sector, I wrote to the Environment Agency about how are carpet tiles disposed of. About, roughly speaking, half of the carpet tiles in this country have got PFAs used. They used it to make something stain resistant. So if you ever come across something which says it's stain resistant, a fabric or a material, glass is another one, self-cleaning glass. I think that's PFAs as well. So all these excuse me, all these things with PFAs in are just being churned out by the million or billion by the industry, and somebody somewhere downstream of the use phase is going to have to end up dealing with them. Reuse makes a lot of sense, even for things which are contaminated with PFA, rather than putting them in landfill or doing something else with them, burning them or whatever. So we asked the Environment Agency, is it best for a salvage yard to landfill all its carpet tiles because it doesn't know whether these PFAs are contaminating them or not? Or is it best just to reuse them above ground until some point-and-click gadget will actually let you know that it is contaminated, and then it can be dealt with sensibly, incinerated, whatever, however you get rid of this stuff, I don't know. Anyway.
It's sort of a parallel with things that we were looking at probably about 15, 20 years ago when we were looking at plasticizers in PVC flooring and PVC extrusions, where under the REACH regulations, I think the percentage is something like 0.1% of an ingredient, of a recipe mustn't exceed, the ingredient mustn't exceed that percentage, 0.1%, or it has to be reported. And we were looking at phthalates as a kind of seriously nasty ingredient that softens PVC to make it from a rigid plastic to a flexible one for things like extrusions, and by that I mean soft edges at the edge and at the tops of covings and the like, and the cove forming components. And what we discovered because we were having major problems with adhesives not bonding properly to the skirting, and actually there was a polymer migration of the phthalates into the adhesive so that the adhesive failed and the bond could no longer survive. What we did some analysis because we needed to find a solution to this problem that was persistent. 56 kilometres of skirting in a PFI hospital. Every one of the hospitals has got it. Not gluing, not sticking. And we discovered that these phthalates were up at 15%, but the manufacturers were not declaring it. And they should be declaring at 0.1%. And even if they should be declaring at 1%, they were still not declaring it. And these were the major plastic producers in the UK, some of the richest organisations on the planet, who sponsor every sports event imaginable. Historically, we had people like ICI, who were in that sector, who then sold up and gave up because of how his hazardous waste regs. They kind of disappeared. But we went to the REACH regulations with a court case to try to get this whole issue addressed. But we all thought that REACH regulations had teeth and it was actually going to make a difference. But in the end, it kind of just fizzled out and nothing really came of it. So there's another thing called Susport, which is about substitution portal. And the idea behind the substitution portal was that all of those manufacturers making nasty chemicals could go to the substitution portal and find case studies by other manufacturers where they'd found a more benign or a natural-based or a bio-based material that could do the same job as another nasty ingredient, and that you could substitute and it would still perform. So getting rid of things like carbon black out of rubber so that you could have vegetable oils, vegetable dyes, to do the same job as phthalates and other nasties, and carbon black. Then you could encourage the industry by sharing your know-how to clean up its act. And the same must be applying to POPs and PFAs if you go to the subs portal, Subsport as it's known. So one hopes that people are being encouraged to go down that route. But if REACH regulations won't pursue big corporations because they're big and rich and they're going to be a challenge, then we're not going to make much progress.
No. I think that's the key to this, is that there are some pretty big financial vested interests involved, and the law can be bent according to how much money you've got.
Yes, absolutely. And even just going back to the previous topic, we have when we had local regional government and we had regional advice and regional guidance, we had local specifics for projects where the developers decided they didn't like what was being asked of them in Cambridge, for example, so they would go to the regional body and then take them to court and say, the developer would get them to drop their local specific environmental guidance and requirements. So you're back to national standards, and then they got rid of regional government altogether because it was a problem.
Yes. And in historically, going back to the Department for Levelling Up, they've got embedded within that department the Minerals Planning Group and MPG, and that's been going on since certainly before the 90s in the 1990s, and that is an industry body which is embedded within the government offices, who's there to, certainly over the years has been there to ensure that materials are crushed for reuse as an aggregate rather than reused as stone or brick or Or...
Yes, because some time ago, I don't know quite when, the concrete sector, the cement sector, the mineral sector all joined forces to have something like a £12 million budget for writing, promoting, marketing virgin materials. So they did their utmost to write all the guidance possible to put you off all of the issues about cement being a major carbon issue, major carbon problem. So they kind of talk to you about in thermal mass, and then they'd have an exhibition. And on the exhibition stand, you'd see that they've got lots of concrete thermal mass, but it's all buried behind dry linings. So it has no function whatsoever in the thermal mass story. But they're still continuing to push this whole idea. You've got to have thermal mass in your building. So, the lobbying that comes off the back of those groups, it's just... atrocious, and the amount of publicity that they produce, and the whole business about sequestered carbon. Concrete sequesters carbon. Well, we always used to think of carbonation of concrete as a major problem for putting the reinforcement at risk, but now all of a sudden it's oh no, concrete absorbs carbon dioxide during its life. In fact, the only real practical use of carbon sequestration with concrete is when you crush it at the end of its life.
I thought that it was only lime mortars which absorbed carbon dioxide.
Well, that was the impression I had, that lime, because it's more moisture permeable, allowed moisture, air and oxygen and carbon dioxide into the material, whereas cement has always been regarded as a waterproof material. So waterproof concrete is much more waterproof, but then they also do waterproof concrete, which is probably a stronger mix and special jointing and things. But I've always regarded concrete as a thing that you don't want water to get into, you don't want air to get into, because you don't want it to corrode the reinforcement and then fail the concrete. So
okay,
it's all very strange.
Moving on. So I made a note here. We've received a thing from the HSE about they've refreshed their asbestos guidance, and asbestos obviously is a harmful substance which has to be treated with great respect.
Yes.
So we will be putting the link up for their new asbestos guidance.
Right.
But I just also wanted to make sure that people realise that there is a view. Some people have a view that nobody can do anything if asbestos has been found in the minutest quantity, or in its most benign form, which is the white asbestos cement sheets,
right,
that are still well in use in this country on agricultural buildings and all sorts of other buildings.
Yeah.
So I'm going to copy that and put it on a Salvo news story, so that there will be a link to that.
Out of interest, what is their renewed guidance? What's their current proposal?
Actually, I don't know, unless I actually go through the old guidance and have a look at the new one.
Of course.
It doesn't tell you, as far as I can see. There might be something somewhere to say these are the changes, but so far I haven't seen an awful lot of this stuff. You can spend weeks reading it and
never really understand it. Yeah. Because historically, I mean, you either got rid of it or you coated it with a PVA or PVAC coating.
Yeah.
So that it was kind of held and unable to release into the atmosphere.
Encapsulation, as it's known.
What was the word?
Encapsulation.
Encapsulation, that makes sense, yeah.
Which is what you also have to do with old timber things which are painted. You can encapsulate them by repainting over the old paint. And it's the airborne dust which comes off the flaky paint, lead-based paint, which is the problem. Anyway, it's the same with any product, really. You can encapsulate it. And the fact is that all these scare stories. The asbestos thing is about, well, in part at least, when a building is demolished, you have to take a lot of care about the asbestos in the building, because that's when it's liberated from whatever part of the building it was in. That's when it's dangerous, gets into the dust, into the local area, or whatever. People breathe it. But other than that, we all live in buildings, or not all of us, but a lot of people live and work in buildings which have got asbestos in. And although they're trying to get rid of it, and it's a good idea, it's not something that you have to be afraid of. And not many people that we know of, that I know of, have been damaged by living and working in an old building. But doubtless it's possible.
We worked on a building that doesn't exist anymore, but it was a maternity building in a hospital in the Midlands, where it was pregnant, about to give birth, and young babies, and they did a refurbishment of this tower block whilst everybody was still in the building, which was very brave. But I mean, it took a lot of specification writing to get that very, very robust procedures in place, based on information that's provided to us by asbestos specialists, about making airtight construction, and then making cleaning facilities for flushing people down when they come out of the construction work zone. But enclosing the whole building in polythene to keep everything under control, and then taking the outer facade off, removing the asbestos, and then repairing the facade. A big, complicated thing to do, and a kind of scary thing for the mothers inside. But that's down to making sure that you communicate well and make sure people understand and feel confident that that's the right thing to do. And obviously the NHS felt it confident enough to do it. So one hopes they were well enough informed to be doing the right thing and making the right choices.
The reason that I mentioned this, I suppose, is because there are people still who are sort of DIYers and small builders, if you like, and if you come across a sheet of white asbestos cement that's blocking up a fireplace or whatever, a lot of people will take precautions and safely dispose of it. And there are in this thing, there are, how do they phrase it?
They're classified as a stable, non-reactive hazardous waste.
Yeah, but in terms of removing asbestos, products with asbestos in them from buildings, some of them are, it's non-licensed work. Firstly, you don't have to be licensed to do it, certain types of material. And secondly, some of it you have to notify the authorities, the Environment Agency presumably, that you're doing work, and some of it you don't. And so that's what I'm going to write, is just an explanation. The HSE has very kindly done this explanation of it all. It's rather embedded within their website, but you can get to it, which is what I've done. So I shall be producing that as a little salvo news story.
Yeah, so something else that, a little bit of exposure to asbestos in my world is that in our own house, where we had a bathroom flood, the ceiling of the floor of the room below has Artex in it on the surface. Now, Artex, up until 1976, I think it was, had an asbestos ingredient in the recipe.
It was a filler. What's known as a filler?
A filler, yeah. Reinforcing filler, I guess. So that the recipe changed subsequently, but if you have a ceiling which has textured stuff on it, you have to have somebody turn up in a white boiler suit and breathing apparatus to do a sample on your ceiling, and then takes it away and then comes back and reports whether it is or it isn't, and then the next action depends on the result of the survey. So that's interesting that, even to do a little survey inside your premises, just taking a swab or whatever the word is, drilling out a sample. You still have to be very cautious when you're doing that.
Yeah, sure. Anyway, moving on. Squibbs, the demolition contractor, has just been fined. Is being chased for £16.5 million that it has. Found the firm's directors had made improper payments over 12 years, including the use of funds for personal expenses. Squibbs say, and this comes on the back of earlier this year, a number of demolition contractors who were fined quite a lot of money for ringing what's known in the trade as ringing contracts, this one is following on from that. So HMRC are obviously taking the demolition industry quite seriously, and Squibbs Group MD Les Squibb, I should say, said the firm completely refutes all allegations and believes the assessment to be unfounded and incorrect. So we'll see what happens there. Next story, in Building magazine, is now building.co.uk. It's published a result of an RICS survey which says that the construction sector, is still not measuring embodied carbon. It says the report was that 43% of respondents do not take embodied carbon measurements. This is globally. In the UK, it's 60%. And we're behind Europe, who say that 73%. So 60% of the UK mainstream construction people do take some sort of notice of embodied carbon.
All right.
44% globally. I don't know what that means. All countries in the world, presumably, or all countries who the RICS is tied up with. But in Europe, it's recorded the highest global sentiment, which is 73%. So 73% of people in Europe are taking notice of embodied carbon. I'm not too sure. When I hear of figures comparing the UK with the UK with Europe, I've had a fair bit of dealings with Europe, and I just know that in the construction sector, as in many other sectors, the Europeans are less. What's the word? They are not as, I was going to say honest, but I can't say that. Less. They take regulations less seriously. They take these sorts of reports less seriously. So they'll tick a box and say yes, we do that, even though they might not. So sometimes the statistics are skewed and make out that Europe is a lot better than the UK. We've certainly found that with reclaimed material. For 20 or 30 years, we were having reports coming back saying how much they reuse in reclaim and reuse in Europe, and we knew for a fact that the UK was the strongest. Certainly used to be the strongest in the world reclamation sector.
Yeah.
Okay, next, moving on.
Whizzing through these.
Well, I'm trying to. So truly reclaimed. We've Salvo has got this thing which it started in 2015, a method of not warranting of a label. We haven't even decided what to call it, a standard or a label for a reclaimed product. And for many years now, well, in fact, since 1995, we've had a thing called the Salvo Code, which is a code of conduct for reclamation businesses, who have good standards in stock purchasing and various other things. And there are 90 of those in the UK now. More are welcome, obviously. But just because a business has got abides by the Salvo Code, it doesn't mean to say that a particular product it's selling is truly reclaimed. It could be but it's
Okay.
not. It's a reproduction of some sort, and sometimes in salvage businesses, it's not clear for consumers who go into a salvage yard necessarily what's the genuine old stuff and what is not, what is reproduction. So truly, and it's certainly that's the case as well with architects and designers. They want to know the material they're using has got a story behind it and comes from an old building, whatever. And so truly reclaimed. We launched it when we did a feasibility study in 2015. We launched it in 2021, and this is about BCA Material Ancien in France, who are on their website are actually using the truly reclaimed label on their reclaimed products. And there's an example which again I'll do a story about this so that people can see they've got the links, but that their material comes with a backstory and it's declared by them to be properly a truly reclaimed item.
All right, yeah, that's good, excellent. There's a lady in the UK who set up a website called Provenance, but it's nothing to do with the construction industry, unfortunately. But it was all about provenance of materials and having the backstory and having the chain of ownership to make sure that it's truly what it claims to be.
That's not Ankita.
No, that's something completely different. That's a lady who was an engineer originally and was asked to go and do an arts course because she had such a powerful brain that she could kind of do things. And she developed a thing where you could walk into a premises and your phone would tell you that on floor so-and-so they've got a special deal on which you will be interested in because your phone and you and the shop knows what you're interested in and could connect it all up. But the first part of it was to walk down an aisle and all of the shelf, all the contents of the shelf, not the shelf labelling, but the contents of the shelf, you could walk past and scan the objects. It would go off to the internet and bring back all the social, environmental and other data that was out there about the product based on logos and product names and other things. And so you could actually make your decision to match your own aspirations and choose the most environmental or the most social product on the shelf. And she's gone on to do other things and has all kinds of clever IT to do that. But also the timber sector, I think it was FSC did a reclaimed or a recycled label. I can't remember quite which it was, to try to engage people in using second-hand timber, not just second-hand, chipboard, recycled timber, but the real thing, bits of wood. I don't know how well that went, because I don't have much involvement with FSC these days, so I'm kind of out of touch.
FSC reclaimed is a thing. It's recycled in the USA. I think they still call it recycled in other parts of the world, but yeah, it's definitely a thing. And one of the problems with FSC is its management, and I expect you know that one of the founders of FSC has pulled out a few years ago because it was labelling stuff from large companies, which was definitely not eco-friendly, and illegally logged stuff and things like this. So a small percentage gets through, and it only this what was it last week? I think it was 5 businesses from is it Estonia or Lithuania, one of the Baltic countries, including the founder of FSC certified in that country pulled out, have resigned from FSC because of its poor management. So, and our argument when we did the feasibility study, we actually had a kind of session between various people connected with the feasibility study we were doing and FSC, and about their it's more of a declaration than a chain of custody fact. And of course that's the same as truly reclaimed. There are elements, there are items which can be proven to come from and go through come out of a building in some place over there, and can be tracked through the supply chain to a stockholder, and then from that stockholder through to an install in a new location. But oftentimes that information is just not available, and so you have to work on a more of a local knowledge and understanding that of where material comes from, and your knowledge of the supply chain itself. Because most dealers have relatively good connections with a number of dealers or supply chainers that they deal with. Excuse me. Right. Anyway, moving on. Bellestock Bellestock in France has opened up a Bellestock were one of our partners in the FCRBE project we did in Europe between 2019 and 2021. And there were two architect partners. Bellestock is an architecture collective in Paris that is very, very keen on reuse, does a lot of it. And the other one were Rotor in Brussels. They were the lead partner in that project. And Bellestock, anyway, is now expanding, and it's opened up a depot in Marseille.
Oh, right, okay.
So that's a nice thing to have happened.
But the title says Bonjour Marseille, so does that mean they've decided not to do it?
No, bonjour means hello.
Oh, does it as well? Or does it only? I thought bonjour was cheerio. I don't know why. There you go.
Bonjour, no, adieu. Adieu would be goodbye.
Okay, bonjour. My mistake. That's schoolboy French for you. Never got there.
Bonjour means literally good day.
Okay.
So it could just be a form of greeting. I suppose people could say bonjour when they part, but I've never heard of it. Not that my French is brilliant.
So have they moved, or are they opening a second?
No, they are. They say because it is essential for the cooperative to take the time to know a territory, its history, its desires, and its needs before settling there. Bellestock spent 2 years in Marseille before officially creating a branch there. 2 years which allowed us to better understand how material reuse practices could be developed in the Provence Alpes Côte d'Azur region, but also to note that actions were already being put in place within the great metropolis of Marseille and its outskirts. Blah blah blah. So they're very good on motivating, particularly students and younger people, which of course needs to be done. But I don't know how strong their connection is with the commercial trade. You could argue probably they're more social enterprise than commercial, but that might be unfair.
Because I mean, in the UK we had a similar, it's a very different thing, but the Norwich University had a new environment building constructed, designed, and the winning team was Archetype. We were in the second team who missed it by 1%. They built a local, i.e. Norfolk, database of reclaimed, recycled, bio-based materials for their competition submission, which is probably what won them the job, and subsequently went on to use a lot of bio-based materials and local materials, timber materials. I don't know that there was anything reclaimed or reused there, and I don't remember any recycled either, but they were probably using a lot of agricultural waste as a construction material. I don't know whether your phone is about to, your service is about to close because it's now 5 o'clock.
Oh, I see. No. We can go on for another, looks like 2 hours.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay.
But I don't think anybody, if there is anybody listening, actually, I ought to check. I'll just check on Twitter, because we are using hashtag Reclamation Time on Twitter, and for anybody who wants to send in a question, I'll just check to see if that's happened. Reclamation Time. And once again, I must apologise for my voice, and
oh yeah, it's
I've got a cold.
not easy to sort out. Have you? I'm currently using Fisherman's Friends.
Very good.
They work. And there's another thing which I found, which is voice something. It's a pastel that is sold in chemists, Boots in particular, for lecturers, singers, and the like, who need to have a clear voice.
Oh, brilliant! Well, I've used a decongestant to get rid of my nose, and a cough mixture to get rid of my cough, but neither of them are that good.
No.
Anyway, there's nobody put any messages up on Twitter, or X,
No.
I should say. Hashtagged Reclamation Time. Not that I can see anyway, which is good.
Yeah.
Or not, as the case may be.
Yes. Yeah. So that competition-winning entry by Archetype, they put together their local database, and I remember that Bill Dunster, whenever he did work, he would always do a reconnaissance of the area of his project and search out companies who had materials that are reclaimable, reusable. I don't recall much in the way of recycled in his specifications, but most of it was reclaimed and reused and repaired and whatever else. So he would do that as a matter of course on any of his projects. And then people like Rotor and presumably Ballistock would do the same, just set up a database. I believe that Rotor would set one up in every town of every project that they were involved in. So there was a potential for a kind of networking between those websites, a database on a website of local materials. Just needs more and more of those. And during the reign of WRAP, Waste Resource Action Programme, which is all about recycling, they highlighted probably about 15 different websites that were there doing recycling activity. And then WRAP lost interest in the construction industry because they thought they'd done it all and that was all they needed to do. People's eye has been taken off the ball on recycling. And even the demolition protocol was aiming to kind of get people to reclaim and reuse, but in reality it just increased the amount of recycling of concrete frame buildings, Didn't do much for the reclaim and reuse sector at all.
Yeah, I think these Salvo Web has been going since the mid-90s online, and I think a lot of these like Rotor and Ballistock have got stuff on the web, obviously. Rotor has got more of a database of material, but it's usually material that's rescued itself. And there are various people who are doing similar things to what Salvo Web has been doing for a long time. but none of them. They're usually funded, and when the funds run out,
of course.
they stop. Whereas Salvo has just ploughed the same furrow, or tried to, for a long time, and we've got users in English-speaking countries like US and Australia, as well as English people in Europe. So it's a pretty big thing, but it's hidden because most of the people who use it are not in mainstream construction. They're private individuals and
Yes.
That sort of thing. So actually, interestingly, a very prominent magazine has just been taken over. Trade magazine has just had a new editor, and they ran a poll. I won't say who it is or what it was, but they ran a poll asking their readers whether they were going to buy an electric car and what they thought of it all. But they didn't put a question in saying, do you already have an electric vehicle, I should say, not car.
Right. Okay.
And so I wrote to her introducing us, just in case she hadn't heard of us, and to say, you didn't have a question on. We've had a car. We're on our second electric car. We've had one for 8 years, so 4 years for the first one, 4 years for the second one, and so everywhere we go is by electric vehicle, and we always use green energy as well. So pretty low carbon footprint for our travelling, although obviously there's the carbon cost of the car itself. Anyway, she came back to me and said, she said, I know all about Salvo. She said, I used to use it. I've used it lots of times to get material that I needed for this, that and the other. And that's what we find, is that the support for Salvo tends to be hidden. And the people who shout loudest are the ones who are trying to get their own platforms, nascent platforms, set up. That apply to RAP, and it certainly applies to some of the European ones. And right now, this moment, there's a webinar being put up by the Association for the Sustainable Building Products,
ASBP,
who are organising their Reuse Now campaign, a Dutch Reclaim Materials hub, which has been going that long and is funded, and it's not they won't have anything to do with Salvo. So we're a kind of outlier, but a well-used outlier. But what I think these people don't realise is that the amount of stuff that's reclaimed, 90% of it probably is niche. It's not reclaimed by mainstream construction at all. It's reclaimed by private individuals, directors of big companies, and architects and designers. Certainly in Europe, there are plenty of architects and designers who are joining in with the with reclamation and reuse. In the UK, not so much. In the USA, it's also getting increasingly popular. So, whereas the UK used to be the strongest, certainly in the 90s, it's probably weaker now than both Europe and the USA, sadly. And that's because of the lack of support from mainstream construction institutions of Salvo itself. We've been out there bleating on, but we'll get there in the end.
Yeah, can I make some suggestions? That I've now got potentially I've got a regular slot at Grand Designs Live twice a year. I've spoken 9 times at 2 events now, and they are always looking for interesting topics, and we have an opportunity to put a topic in front of people, and it's also a possibility that you could have a speaking opportunity now that we have got contacts with the organisers of the events. So they do one in London, they do one in NEC. So Excel and NEC about 6 months apart. And they happen at the same time as the UK Construction Week in both locations. So there's this opportunity for people to wander through from the construction into the grand designs and vice versa. and if there are the right topics and the right speakers, then there's another audience there. And as you've said to me in the past, on many occasions, and it's always rings around my head, is Mrs. Vaguely Rich and Mrs. Vaguely Posh are the ones who are buying reclamation materials. So they're likely to be attending Grand Designs, and for that matter, all of the other self-build shows that happen around the regions. So that's one potential audience that you probably need to try and find your way into, or I can try and introduce you to them. And the other one is the ACAN, Architects Climate Action Network, who emerged at the time when Greta asked the adults to come and join in. They have been running a number of seminars on bio-based, natural, low-carbon, reclaimed reuse. And so they're another audience that you need to be in front of, or at least involved in the committees that are discussing and setting out campaigns to take to government. Because you have a far greater knowledge of the sector, and not just the, in quotes, circular economy, but what's been going on for decades. So we need to introduce you to them and get you on one of their committees, because I think you could do an awful lot of good there. And I know people like Letty have been relying on more aged members of the construction industry who have got decades of experience acting as a guide and judge for all of the stuff they do, because they are coming at it with young enthusiasm but lacking any of the kind of industry experience. So I think that's possibly another area to try and tackle with Letty. I know Letty are primarily focused on energy, but if they're starting to engage with embodied carbon as well, then reclaim and reuse rather than recycling or virgin or new has got to be on their agenda.
Okay, the Grand Designs, we have been involved with them from time to time, and not terribly successfully, and including giving talks, but the talks tended to be, because they were not specific to reclamation and reuse, that element of it tended to be subsumed by things like green paint or Kevin's keenness to use something other than those green things that you use to do washing up, and so it was not terribly successful. The audience, however, were itching. We had a slideshow, and so the slides were all coming up, and they wanted to know about those slides. But unfortunately, we weren't allowed to talk about them because the talk was steered by the grand Kevin, and that so that put paid to that. ACAM we haven't had anything to do with. What was the other one that you just mentioned?
Letty, which is London, London Energy Transformation Initiative.
Yeah, we were involved with them. We've been involved with them. Again, they've been hijacked by, well, not hijacked by, but their driving force for Letty is to assiduously avoid salvo. So we were involved in some aspects of the reuse. I mean, the trouble with reuse is that it's a very small thing compared to other stuff. So if you're looking at recycling concrete, that's many millions of tons, whereas reuse is got a much smaller throughput. So, but Letty were involved in this in the early stages. We tried. They were formed on the back of what was the London Waste and Recycling Board, which became Re-London. Re-London. London Waste and Recycling Board we didn't get anywhere with. We tried for years, and they just didn't want to have anything to do with us. And this was during the era, the Great Recycling era, which ran from about 2000 through to relatively recently, really, 2015, 16, 17.
Yeah.
And now, of course, because we were ignored over that large period of time, we didn't have the kind of profile. We still had a lot of traction with individuals and people who actually wanted reclaimed material, and there are a lot of those, thankfully. But we're not with the institutions and the kind of I don't know, drivers of the agenda, who, to a large extent, when it came to reclamation and reuse, are trying to reinvent the wheel over and over again, and rather badly. So, whereas there would been a lot more sense if they'd got involved with us and said, this is what we want to do, what's the best way we can do to improve things, not in a cataclysmic way, but just make some progressive improvements. When we first started Salvo, roughly speaking, 2% of the construction materials in this country were reclaimed. Now, we reckon, we've got a load of facts and figures, but we reckon it's probably less than 2%.
Yeah.
That's reclaimed and reused. So we haven't made any progress at all. If anything, probably gone backwards. But we're there. We will respond to anybody who gets in touch with us.
Well, can I go back to the grand designs thing? I have had 2 opportunities to speak with Kevin MacLeod face to face, but also all of the other 9 or the other 7 speaking opportunities. Max McMurdo was the guy who was hosting and doing all the question and answer with the audience stuff, and he's a real reclaim and reuse enthusiast, and he's been doing no end of work in that arena for the whole of his working career, I would say. He's probably in his late 30s or 40s, and he's a really bright young mind, and he loves to learn, and he loves working with me side by side, having conversation with the audience, with him, with me, and all this sort of stuff. And I'm sure that if we were able to kind of focus on working with Max, he would really give you the opportunity to speak about the subject in a really strong way. And if you had all of the slides, he would want to know about those slides, and he would stop you and ask you, what's on that slide, what you're doing with it, how are you doing it, where's it coming from? I think we could put a package together and take it to the lady in charge, Carly, and see if she'll take it. And I think, a package of a couple of speakers and some really good images, and with Max on our wing, it could be a really excellent presentation, which, they've had me back twice because the first ones were good, they liked it, and they wanted more. So there's always a possibility that that we could kind of find another way of getting you there in a much better context.
That would be good.
Excellent. Okay. So look him up, Max McMurdo.
I know. We know Max McMurdo.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay.
We've never had anything to do with him, and he's never joined in with anything that we've done either.
Okay.
I think he's got his own. There's a lot of these celebrity sort of reusing types, like there's quite a few of them out there. They know who they are. Will, generally speaking, not they'll use Salvo and quite often use it extensively to make money in their own media profile, if you like, but they won't tell people that. So we don't get a mention. Quite often, they'll have they might even have rung us up and said, "Who's doing this and who's doing that?" And we'll tell them. And yet, when the story gets written or the TV program is made, they don't mention that.
No,
it's a kind of hidden secret. But we don't care particularly about that. I mean, we will just carry on. We're going to make a success of this. I'm hoping that the truly reclaimed idea, the label itself, is going to elicit. When you were talking about the other product, the telephone, we will have QR tags on products in pubs and hotels and other places where the public go.
Oh, clever. Yes,
the
very
QR
clever.
tag, which takes you to a page, which is the story of that material, how it was reclaimed, what its embodied energy is, and the various other social impacts, environmental, social, economic impacts of reclaiming that sort of stuff, is who the dealer was that did it, who the installer was. So if you wanted something exactly the same, you could actually perhaps achieve that, rather than what all the magazines do, including Grand Designs, get the look by using, illegally logged Siberian larch and I don't know. It's just I suppose I've been doing this for so long that you become both. Before I started Salvo, doing it as a reclamation dealer as well, you kind of, it's just you're hearing the same thing over and over again. You just get used to it, and but I think we will make an impact with the truly reclaimed thing.
I think you're right, and I think that's something that can be taken on the road and kind of, put in front of as many audiences as possible. The challenge is funding, attending exhibitions, but there's lots of local authorities who are trying to do their bit, and they're running eco events in schools at the weekend, and there's one coming up in February which you probably ought to be attending. I'm sort of helping with the organising of it in a way, but probably going to be speaking and exhibiting, and we need some of your material on the wall behind us, and maybe a few samples, because I take 2 enormous boxes and lids full of samples. It would be useful to have some reclamation materials there too.
Right. Okay.
Teddington, I think, is the next one. Teddington, first weekend of February. And I have the opportunity to kind of try and promote the idea of reclaimed and reused there as well. And I can offer your name as a potential speaker too.
Well, that's very kind of you. We just have to sort of plug it into the other things which are going on. We did spend, I have spent a lot of time in the past doing that sort of thing, and to no great effect, I have to say. It doesn't. The audiences at most of these places are they're not expecting to hear about reclaim and reuse, so and they don't go there to see it. We had a large area of in one of the Grand Designs exhibitions. And it was full of salvage stuff, and it didn't really work, because when people go around an exhibition looking at a load of new stuff, new materials, new this, new that, and they come across a load of old stuff, they can't really cope with it, and so they end up they go somewhere, but it's not an ideal situation. That's why we did 19 annual fairs, the Salvo Fair. Last one was in 2017, and that they were well attended by not just the public, but also a lot of architects and designers and people, as well as the trade. So that worked. That format works, and we're hoping possibly to do something next year. Like I said, the last one was 2017, and we had done a lot, but we don't have a big budget, and
no, that's the big challenge, isn't it? It's a real challenge. But I remember I attended one of them. I don't know which year it was, but it was at near Stevenage, the big house near Stevenage.
Nebworth,
yeah. And that I found it absolutely fascinating. So many interesting things there, and interesting people, and a lady who embroidered internal doors. Could you believe it? Embroidered doors. Did some amazing stuff, just using secondhand second-hand panel doors. Really interesting. I think I spoke at that event too.
I expect you did. I expect we browbeated you into giving some sort of presentation.
Yeah, I mean, the topic that I wanted to kind of put over was, I could see walking around all of the stands that there are thousands of bits of ironmongery, thousands of doors, thousands of bits of glass, stained glass windows and stained glass panes and things. But the construction industry can't cope with that. And what I proposed was that as a collective, that somebody puts together door sets complete with doors, glazing, ironmongery, and offered that as a package, because then the industry could engage with that, whereas they couldn't engage with buying all the bits and trying to make doors up.
No, you're absolutely right. We've been banging on about that for a long time. When I was actually a dealer, I could make things like that happen. But actually talking to dealers and saying, why don't you do this? It's very difficult to get any kind of I don't understand why they don't do it. But there is a guy in the US called Andrew Ellsworth who's created a business called Doors Unhinged, which are new doors, newer doors, 1960s, 70s, 80s doors. I suggested to him that he should keep all the ironmongery together. In fact, what we could do is when you take a door out of a building, you instead of unscrewing the hinges and taking all the door furniture off, just leave it all on, put a couple of buttons top and bottom across the frame, and then use a skill saw to get, not a skill saw, what are they called, a reciprocating saw, reciprocating hacksaw type thing, and go down the outside of the architrave in the masonry and just cut through all the fixings, and then you can take the whole door out intact.
Yes.
With all
intact, the whole thing, yeah.
Now, the only place I've seen that done, recently at least, is in Nairobi, and we've loosely involved. I haven't been there. I've just seen it done, with photographs. But we've tried to get involved with various projects around the world, but Nairobi seemed to be Kenya, in fact, seemed to be quite an interesting one because they've already got a salvage yard mentality, and knowledge transfer normally from the West is, we will give you knowledge in the poor African countries, but actually, in some respects, they're ahead of us, and we could actually do with a little bit of knowledge transfer from them to us.
To us, yes. I agree entirely. I've recently been approached by a lady who's from the UK, and she's currently, and has been there for a long time, she's been in one of the African countries where she's helping small micro SMEs to become, to start out in the first place, trying to use traditional construction methods, because everyone's brought all of these kind of European and other worldly methods of construction, which all you can do is import everything. 100% of the building gets imported to be able to build with these techniques, whereas all the traditional techniques have kind of lost their way, and they're trying to rebuild those businesses, rebuild those trades, the artisans, and get them being reused again, but in modern buildings using traditional techniques. And it might be that there's another connection that could be made there, to kind of take the whole reclaim sector idea to her and see if that could be run with as well. Because, in so many countries other than the UK and Europe, I always say in India, a bike is a bike until it's rust. In the UK, a bike is a bike until Christmas, and then you get another one. There's this whole attitude that, there are people who've got the skills to repair things and reuse them, and there are people with the skills, the crafts, the artisans, who can make things happen, and we just got to help to rekindle those businesses. And now's the time, I think, because everyone's got to do their bit.
Okay, look, I think it's an hour and a half on now. So if there was anybody listening, this will go.
You're going to record this and publish it, aren't you?
It is recorded. It's going to it's a live podcast, which is recorded as it's happening, and then it will be available for anybody who wants to download it. And I'll do a synopsis on there of what we've talked about, but and the other things which we didn't get round to talking about as well, there aren't that many, but there are a few, and I'll put the whole lot online somewhere. I was thinking of putting it onto LinkedIn as well as Twitter, X.
Yes, and when you do, make sure I'm aware of it, because sometimes these things slip past me and I don't notice them.
Okay.
And I'll re-ping them, and I'll do everything I can to ping them around the social media.
That's very kind. I noticed you've done that in the past with some of the stuff we do, which is nice. Well,
and the trouble is sometimes you don't, because you don't see it happen. You don't see it. It's whizzed past, and you can never find it again. So you've got to do it when you see it.
True.
Okay. Well, that's really fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if there's anything that I can do on Green Building Encyclopedia website, I'd be only too pleased to post any of your articles, but definitely link back to anything that you've posted as well.
Right. One of the things which I think I assume that you could do, and certainly you could help with, provided there's some money, is on specification. Specification clauses.
I saw that in the first item or second item in the paper. I'd be only too pleased to help with writing specification clauses to help get these things into contracts, because architects hate writing specifications, and they're not very good at it, and they don't know how to do it robustly. And unless it's written robustly, it'll get substituted out because the contractors don't want to go there. And to enable them, not only you need that advanced procurement part of the process where you get the contractors to go out and look for the reclaimed materials, not just turn around and say, oh no, we don't want to do that, we've got a supply of fresh meat here, why don't we use that stuff instead?
Well, what I'd like to see, because the contractors are never going to do that, not voluntarily anyway. They'll only do it if they're told to by the clients. But what I'd like to do is see whether we can make some progress on getting some. I don't know whether you do open source specification clauses, but it seems to me that a lot of your stuff is kind of open source. At least people don't have to pay to get the information. But that if there's some way of funding it, what we could do then is we could send to demolition contractors and the upstream disposers of buildings, including government buildings, some general specification clauses about reclamation and reuse, and then with a thing on there saying if you've got a specific. For example, we've got a building we did a reclamation audit on the other day in central London, world famous building. They're taking out big window frames, and the sensible way of doing that is, these are old window frames, is to take them out intact with all the glass and everything else. That's the best chance of them being reused. But that needs to be described. So I was trying to write a specification clause. I'll send you a copy of what I wrote, and you can have a good old laugh. But that's where we need help. So
because a long time ago, bioregional, when bioregional reclaimed existed at the time of BedZ, I was approached by bioregional to help them write some general words, general clauses, which they could use in their documents to get them into contracts. At the time, I wrote my own, which were slightly more robust than the ones that bioregional were using. But that information exists. It's still there. It's still waiting to be put to good use. So That's a starting point, and yours as a starting point. We can work them together and see what we can get out of it.
Yeah, there's two aspects of it. There's the extraction, which is like a method statement, and then there's the reinstalling it in another location, which again needs to be specified.
Yeah, the one thing that I've also been trying to do is trying to persuade the timber sector, who've got these certification schemes for fire doors and fire door installation, and I've been saying to them, can we develop what you're already doing? The idea behind it is that each individual party that contributes to a fire door assembly, which is usually done on site because that's the way, historically, contractors have always wanted to do it cheaply as possible, so they get loads of individuals to come in and do their bit. So each of the individuals would have their own certified components and their own certified addition of those components to somebody else's door, frame, leaf, or whatever it might be. And so at the end of it, one door set would effectively have 6 or 7 labels on it. Or you go and buy a ready-made door set which has all the fire performance in it. But what I said to them is, can we get a certification of the extraction of that door to save it and reuse it? But of course, they're all timber door manufacturers or steel door manufacturers, and they don't want to know because they don't want that competition. But now that we're kind of moving into the circular economy, allegedly, and more conscious that there's not enough material to go around and we've got to start being careful where we get our materials, then the reclaiming of those doors is fundamentally important. So that's another area to pursue and persist.
That overlaps with material passports and that type of thing. If all the material which was extracted, the whatever information existed when a 1960s building was built about the specification of the materials and what was actually used, the schedule of material, and what standards they conformed to, if that went with the material itself down, physically through the chain of custody, then it would make the reinstaller's life an awful lot simpler.
Yeah, and in fact, there's one organisation that I was approached by recently via Edge, the showroom. There's a consultancy there who are being approached by main contractors, big developers, who are wanting product passports for the new construction, whereas historically they were originally invented as an idea to take materials from buildings, give them a piece of paperwork to go with them, but they are actually having those as part of their facilities management, operation and maintenance manual and other documents, including materials passports or product passports as they were historically called. So there is a kind of move on the part of some companies to really engage with the circular economy during new build construction. So there are routes to get that information used and get some case studies out that can be promoted quite widely. So, and I am expecting another call from that party sometime soon. So we'll see. And they have been at some of the exhibitions showing off some of their materials and taking materials from buildings that are being refurbished and turning them into new materials and bringing them back to the same building to install them. So there's some intelligent work going on there. It just needs to kind of engage with those things and get some more case studies out there and show some real evidence of proper circular economy.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That sounds brilliant.
Yeah. Okay. No, really look forward to finding a way of doing that. So, and doing it, making it happen.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. I'll be in touch with you as a follow-up to this. But thanks very much for.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity again. I really enjoy these. There's some fascinating subjects and stories to kind of get your teeth into, and remind you of your past experiences, which is really great, I think. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. See you again next month, hopefully.
So for anybody who happens to be listening, that was Brian Murphy, from Green Building Education. I'm going to call it GBE. It's still GBE.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And I'm Thornton Kay from Salvo. And that was Reclamation Time.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Cheerio. See you again next month.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.